Okay, we're here, we're live. All right, welcome to the City Council's Capital Improvement Program, CIP work session. This is the beginning of our budget season, which seems like it just ended moments ago, but it's starting up again. So we're going to begin that with this work session today before we have our City Council this evening, and I'm going to pass it off to the City Manager to pass it off.
Thank you, Mayor. And good afternoon. As was stated, this is the launch of our capital improvement planning work session in our budget process. As you can see from the slide, for the most part, Taylor Floyd, Jade Dundas, and Tony McDowell are going to be doing the majority of the talking in the presentation. But I wanted to start off with just a couple of comments. First, I want to thank council. This has been a long day and will be a long day for some of you. We started off with a interesting and very commemorative event, the groundbreaking for the Ramada Inn and supportive services housing for our community. And so we are extremely pleased that has occurred, and that actually is a capital project. So this year we've decided, when we start our budget process, usually we don't start with the capital budget. We start with the operating budget. But our needs in terms of capital needs are so significant that we think it is imperative that we start talking about these needs. We know that we have the ingenuity, the steadfast intent to address these needs, but it is going to take some innovative thinking on the part of our community. We're going to need to decide how to prioritize these needs, and obviously we've got to figure out a revenue source to fund these needs. So Taylor, Jade, and Tony are going to get into the details, but thank you, and hopefully we'll finish a little ahead of time.
Hopefully, Sarah.
Taylor.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Taylor Floyd, Budget Manager. And as the City Manager said, we're going to give you sort of an overview of our capital planning for the FY24 budget development process. So I'm going to start with just sort of an overview of some basics around capital budgeting and the investments we've made historically. Talk a little bit about how we do capital planning here at the City of Asheville. Then I'll hand it over to Jade to give a status update on some current capital projects and specific projects. And then Tony is going to wrap up with debt and financial capacity and a summary. Starting with our key takeaways for today, our goal with our capital planning is to have a plan that considers long-term needs. And what we mean by long-term needs are just simply maintaining our existing assets, because those are really critical to continuing to deliver the service that our citizens expect from us, our community expects from us. Our current capacity to fund projects outside of the existing plan is limited. That current plan is mostly consumed with basic maintenance projects, but we have a lot of additional needs. And then we have some significant decisions on the horizon, as Ms. Campbell said, related to our needs and funding those needs. So we got some big things ahead. We need some more resources to accomplish those things and continue on with that maintenance. So starting with the overview. What is capital, why is it separate, and how do we fund it? So essentially, capital is big, expensive things that last for a long time. You can kind of see the details there in that first column. Why it's separate is in large part because of those very reasons. They're project-based, so they have a start and finish, not programs like what we do in the operating fund, or funds, I should say. They last for a really long time, and usually the scale of investment is pretty significant. Another major reason why we budget these things kind of separately and talk about them separately from our operating is that use of debt. We cash fund all of our operating costs. So again, most of how we fund these are with debt, be that general obligation bonds or limited obligation bonds, revenue bonds, perhaps in the case of the water system. We do put some general tax revenues, some cash into our capital program. And of course, we have outside funding coming from a variety of places. So that's why we talk about capital separate from operating. But really, at the end of the day, the resources that we use are the same. So when we pay the principal and interest on those debt obligations, that's coming from our general tax revenues, just the same as how we fund services like police and fire. So again, those are not only the same resources, but really the same reasons as operating. And it really comes down to maintaining our existing service level, improving or expanding where we need to do that, and trying to achieve our goals. One example of that might be resurfacing. So, we resurface an individual street. Hopefully that improves the conditions of that street and helps us to maintain our overall road network quality. We also may do some spot sidewalk improvements there that improve ADA access, helping achieve some of our equity goals. So again, this is really, much like in the operating budget, really essential to our basic service delivery in the community. So kind of looking back at how we've spent our capital over a pretty long period there, you can see there's a pretty big spike right around fiscal year 20. If we kind of go back to the early part, most of our resources going into our capital program were PAYGO, so cash, until FY14, when council dedicated 3 pennies to our capital program. So you can kind of start to see some incremental increases there. Then we have the 2016 GeoBond referenda that were passed, so a little more. And then one more thing that kind of adds to that spike is the RADTIP project, which was a large dollar project that is recently wrapped up. But you can also see that we're spiking and we're going back down. So what we'd like to do is try to maintain, again, some of the resources that we've had in the recent past to make sure that we can get done all of the things that we need to get done. So looking at project timing, the way this all works is a little bit complex, and there's a lot going on, and you all may hear about projects that are at different stages, so we kind of wanted to highlight what those might be. So we have active projects, street resurfacing, fleet replacement, we do those every year. There's a few other specific building projects that are highlighted there that were budgeted in prior years, but we are actually building currently. Then every year, council adopts that first year of our 5-year CIP. So again, the annual things that we do all the time, resurfacing, fleet replacement, and then there'll be other projects, again, a few examples at the bottom in the middle there. And then we have our planned projects. So those are gonna be the projects that are in years 2 to 5 of our capital improvement program. And again, we have those annual allocations that we make, and then we'll have some other things that come through there. The reason that I point this out is to kind of emphasize the planning aspect of this, because if we can do that well, that really allows us to focus on completing projects as they are adopted and active, as opposed to trying to plan them when they're getting into that active stage, which is a challenge. Any questions on kind of, again, high-level CIP before I get into the planning? All right, so this is just a quick overview, again, of how we go through our planning process kind of internally. We start with our capacity. What resources do we have available to fund projects? That's, of course, impacted heavily by our existing plan. Tony's going to talk a lot more about the specifics of the debt and the debt capacity a little bit later. Then we turn to our needs and goals. So trying to identify projects, trying to estimate project costs, and then look at our priorities and how we can achieve those with the projects that we've identified. So really it's kind of taking those 3 pieces, that funding capacity, the identified needs, and the priorities, all together is how we come up with our capital plan, our capital improvement program. So then, of course, that new plan and the current spending informs the funding capacity that we have in the next year. So when we're looking at identifying needs, of course, we rely heavily on the studies and plans to both identify and prioritize projects. Those could be corridor studies or a variety of plans. One note, last year during our budget development process, we talked a lot about our comprehensive facilities study. We are currently working on that, but it will not be complete in time to fully inform this year's plan. The estimated completion for that is early summer, but that will have a big impact on our facility maintenance component of our capital plan. Of course, we're looking at how projects help us achieve all of our goals. And then, there are really two main opportunities for community engagement. One is kind of at a high level when we're doing those plans and studies. So when we do those, we do a lot of public engagement to try to make sure that we've gotten input on, again, identifying those project needs and prioritizing. Then there's kind of another more focused opportunity when we're actually developing individual projects. So at that point, it's really more focused on, if it's a sidewalk or a streetscape or whatever it is, like how is that gonna impact the people that are in that part of our community? And lastly, we are trying to take a holistic approach to project planning. And what we mean by that, or what I mean by that is, we're trying to make sure that we're working together so that we're not redoing things in the same place. And a great example of that is the Haywood Street project. Great streetscape project that we did with some bond money. Also, as part of that project, water and MSD replaced some infrastructure that was underneath the road. So obviously what we want to avoid is putting all of that time and effort and money into a beautiful streetscape project only to rip it up in a few years because there's failing infrastructure underneath it. So again, we're trying to take that holistic approach on the planning side. So this is kind of a clip of our actual budget document. And again, just kind of want to talk a little bit about how things move. So again, council adopts that FY23. You all adopted that in June as part of the budget adoption. And so as we look to planning our next 5-year plan, we essentially shift those 4 out years forward. So 24 becomes what will be the adopted budget for the next budget development process. And then we have a new year 5, a new out year. And again, if we're, what we hope to do with this planning is that there's minimal changes happening in those kind of left-hand side, those years that are coming up quickly, and bigger changes happening in those out years. And again, that gives us just that opportunity to vet projects, to do more project planning before things come to be budgeted or become active projects. So what's in our plan? These are, this list is all of our planned projects in those out years. So what is currently our year 2 to 5 of our capital improvement program. The ones that are blue and italicized are new or substantially updated projects. But one thing I want to point out here is this is a relatively small list. So again, we don't have a lot of capacity, and a lot of that capacity is taken up by some maintenance type projects, but we have a lot of needs that aren't on this list.
When you say capacity, you mean financial capacity?
Correct.
You're not talking about staffing capacity, although we have that too, but you're talking about financial capacity.
Yes, yes. So lastly, kind of the last part of our internal process is really allocating funding among these project types. And so basically we group like projects together. And part of the reason the main reason honestly that we do that is, it's a little bit challenging to decide the relative value of a fire apparatus replacement to a street resurfacing to a HVAC replacement in a building. So it just kind of helps us plan better. And what we do is provide an allocation in each one of these groupings that staff work towards. And that also helps to plan that out kind of in that 5-year time horizon so that we're having not a bunch of work coming in 1 year and then none in the next, so that we can plan those out better.
Can you break, so this says in the corner, amounts shown are from FY23 5-year CIP and includes external funding sources. So when we look at the memo that was provided along with this presentation that's attached to the agenda under greenways, So what,
So the memo is going to be active projects. So there's no, the only overlap would be that FY23 adopted projects would be in both this number and the list that you all received. So again, we get back to this, right? That list is active projects. And what we're talking about in the 5-year CIP are planned projects. So there's, again, not going to be much.
well, I mean, some of these on the memo, it says they're in construction. So what's the difference between an active project and one that's being constructed right now? Is that
And
not the same thing?
Yeah, that would be the same.
So some of these are, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to read the memo.
Because they all seem active on this memo.
Well, no,
Yes.
some are in design and some are in planning. I just don't know what.
So all of those are active. If those are essentially projects that have a budget that we are actively working on. We're not in, they may say planned, like we're doing project development,
Yeah.
but they are not in those out years of our
So
CIP.
is this snapshot just saying in FY23, from the FY23 budget, this is what you spent toward the 5-year capital plan
Correct.
in this 1 year? Okay, because
In-
then 42.9 million for fleet and equipment seems really,
In the whole 5-year plan.
well, but then if you look greenways here, there's millions more in greenways than 4.1.
Because those were adopted in past years. So those may have been adopted in 21 or 22.
Oh, I totally do not understand how to
This is
reconcile
Well,
the
and-
out
memo with
here
this.
of 23 to,
Yeah,
And
but
then
you said
if you
it's,
look at the identifying needs with the red boxes around it earlier in the presentation, it shows fleet management has an annual amount that's not near 42 million totaled.
that's right.
we do not know how to read these, but
Well, I want to make sure I understand, because, okay, the whole, well, okay, no, I
I
do see
don't-
it does.
no,
It
I
does,
don't.
the total, not just fleet, all of those things.
Correct.
And you hear
Yeah.
you just say fleet.
By each one
Okay.
of those sections, correct.
That's-
okay.
So again, the memo was really intended to be a status update on projects that would fall into this active category. So again, things that have been budgeted either in the current year or previous years that we are working on right now, not projects that are in some sort of, that have been planned in years 2 to 5 of our current capital improvement program. That are not, so those
Yeah.
are not budgeted. So anything,
I guess I'm just thinking about, as long as I mean, part of it is how you all understand it in terms of accounting requirements and budgeting requirements. I think one of the challenges is to how to tell this story to us and to the public in terms of where we're investing dollars. So that's primarily my concern, is that there's some way to clearly tell that story.
and I think that's one of the challenges about communicating about capital projects generally is, again, a lot of times when we're bringing a construction contract to you all to talk about a project that's underway, again, that project may have actually, the budget for that project may have been adopted 2 years ago,
No.
2 fiscal years ago. But when we're looking at it from a planning standpoint, we're very forward-focused on things that we have not budgeted yet. So I think, again, that to your point, that is one of the challenges of communicating effectively about where we're at with our capital needs and projects in general.
So
I got you off.
Taylor,
That's fine.
for the slide, going where the mayor asked the questions.
It was 50.
This is a future. What we presented in the, Memo.
FY23 adopted budget, yes,
right, is what we've done in the past.
correct.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah. I mean, it would be totally awesome if one of these columns on the memo equaled 4.1 million.
They do.
So I was trying to figure that out, like, does the one, see, I don't know which one does. I don't think one of them does.
We can try to provide some more clarity around how the numbers tie out.
So on the memo, for example, it has, under greenways, it has $17+ million in greenway projects. And then it has how much has actually been spent. And then it has a column called encumbrances. And encumbrance, I assume, means it hasn't been spent, but we already know we're
Under
gonna need
contract,
it.
essentially.
Yeah. And then remaining is, well, we haven't gone over, and so there's some remaining in this budget, but don't get crazy because the project's not done.
Right.
You might need to pull on that column. And then also, I mean, there's a bunch of them that are only in design, and so there's a lot of money still yet to be spent. Has that money already been found? Is it?
Yes.
Budgeted.
Okay, so all the projects in the memo, we have fully funded
Correct.
and have earmarked funds, even if it means year over year over year going
Correct.
forward.
And some of those projects may still be, projects that were from the
That we-
GEO bond.
Sure. So when you say we don't have additional capacity, you're saying we already got all this packed into the budget. We already know what we're looking at for spending to get all these done, and we can pay for them, but we don't have room for, if you're gonna add anything else, we don't have.
We have room for what we have in our 5-year plan and probably not a lot beyond that.
Okay, that's very helpful, thank you. Because some of these are, I mean, this is a significant amount of capital we're doing here, so.
Yes, yep. Any other questions? All right, well, I will turn it over to Jade.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. Jade Dundas, Capital Projects Director. As Taylor had mentioned in the outline of the presentation today, this will focus, my portion of the presentation will focus more on specific projects, starting with a general high-level overview of status, for example, the bonds progress, and then moving into some specific project details that we will be bringing in front of council over the next 6 months for decisions related to the future budget approval, and then also just other funding decisions for like contract award and so forth. So again, you've heard this update a few times. 2016 GEO bond, we are on schedule to complete or have under contract by the summer of 2023. All of the projects that or funding was assigned to. The summer 2023 is a self-imposed deadline to try to provide some opportunity for final debt to be issued and to build a bit of a buffer in there. There are lessons learned through the bond process. Sidewalks, believe it or not, have proved to be a little bit more challenging in their development than maybe was anticipated. So in future bonds, we'll definitely have to build that into the understanding of where the projects are, trying to make sure that we have some planning before we introduce those into a bond cycle.
And that's that because of right-of-way acquisition?
There's a variety of, but roadway, right-of-way is definitely a challenge for those projects. There's a lot of those are on DOT roadways, and having a DOT approval, especially at intersections and signalization. So there are a number of challenges with those, but definitely will factor those into the next go-around. We, as staff, continue to study and continue to understand our assets better, and certainly that will inform our future budget development and the needs and prioritization of funding. As Taylor had mentioned, we have a big challenge to prioritize with the limited funding, and so it's important for us as staff to be able to understand where we're determining, trying to prioritize the funding of projects as we go forward. The challenges that we face in trying to program these are additional service needs, trying to accommodate for those changes, aging infrastructure, and aging infrastructure is applicable on any piece of infrastructure from buildings to stormwater and to water lines. And so certainly trying to do our best to understand the systems and get ahead of those points of failure. And then also effects of climate change and carbon reduction goals. This actually could be 2 separate bullet points because Public Works, for instance, they have the challenge of responding directly to high volume water events. Those cause landslides, and so Greg and his team are constantly trying to address those issues. And then also how we're programming and planning to put sustainability and efficiency into our projects is important for us as we look to the future of these projects. Sometimes that's difficult because we are planning, as Taylor mentioned, in that 5 to 10-year window. We'll go back to bond for a second, but more importantly, this illustrates what we can do when we do receive funding. There are a lot of ways that we can expand that funding. Most of you have seen this slide before, where you see this $74 million in column A is as an example, is the bond funds that we received in authorization to commit to in 2016. In the time that we've pulled these projects together, we've added $17.5 million to this. So that's about a 23% addition of funding to these projects, which just makes us be able to build. Some of those dollars were made to or needed to shore up budgets, but others were just allowed us to expand the project. So we turned $74 million in 2016 into $91.5 million in the final delivery. And again, we are showing a few dollars left, but we do have plans to spend that, and staff is aware of those spending expectations.
So don't go thinking you got $30 million sitting around.
No, it's all accounted for.
Yeah.
And you will see a lot of that in the spring. Those will become as construction award requests. So Walter Ear's been up in front of you a couple of times this year. It started in last spring in a budget work session and talked about the need for the advanced focus on project development and really kind of keeping a 5 to 10 year time frame in mind with regard to project development. One of the slides that he showed talked about being able to purchase land and then develop that land and then design the facility and construct the facility. We understand that that's not a 2 or 3 year endeavor, and so it's important for us to be able to create these projects and show council to tell that story that Taylor was talking about over time. And the only way that we can really, these are big ticket items, and the only way we can actually create that path forward and that strategy for accomplishing these projects is to really have that long-term vision and help council to understand what the incremental pieces of these projects are. You can see, as I'd mentioned in the previous slide, is there are a lot of reasons and a lot of challenges associated with project development. The right-hand column here shows the reasons why these facilities are necessary to be focusing on. Just to point out a couple of items here, we can certainly talk about any of them, but transit maintenance facility, I think Walter's had this in a couple of his presentations, is that facility is maxed out in its capacity to hold and maintain the infrastructure, the buses that we have. So it's really important for us to focus on how we expand that capacity in order to support the expansion of maintenance transit services in the future. There are some projects on here as well. The next two projects, West Asheville Public Safety Station, which we've talked about before, and then Oakley Multi-Purpose Facility. These are combined public safety and recreational facilities. The Oakley facility also has a county library in it. And so these are really not only budgeting challenges for us, but they're really opportunities for us to have a multi-purpose focus in how we present projects in the future, to have partnerships potentially with other agencies that have services in our facilities. For example, the library in Oakley is our facility. Those two buildings are just at the end of their useful life. We have maintained, with the facilities condition assessment we're doing along with a comprehensive study has indicated that putting a new roof on Asheville Public Safety Station has extended the life of that building a little bit. But you look at the Oakley facility, which hasn't had a lot of major maintenance, and there's an indication that we really need to be focused on trying to figure out how to replace or certainly renew in a major way that
Is that one of our Pintos?
It definitely
Not-
is.
not one of our-
Those two both are in the Pinto category, except the Asheville Public Station's got new tires. And then also just changing operations. The Fire Station 8 is, fire has identified a need to change operations in that facility over the last few years. And as a result, it's a great location for the operations that they're running, but it really pushes the capacity of that facility. These are examples of our projects and our needs. This is not an exhaustive list, but again, it's really important for us as staff to be able to understand how to prioritize these against all those other things that we saw in that list of categories, greenways, roads, water, all of those other things, understanding that there are limited funds.
On the operations campus here, I mean, I know, if some people are looking at this for the first time, I mean, there's been a long discussion about Thomas Wolfe Auditorium and if we'd really truly be looking at a full remodel of the facility or something less than half of that to keep it operational for other purposes. We've had a lot of discussion about that. So I don't want people to walk away from this going, wow, look at that, this set in stone list of projects. On the operations campus, I assume that's the South Charlotte Street, affectionately called Tajma Garage. And, I'd be curious to know what, if any, discussions have happened. I know we talked at some point with the county about consolidating garage needs in an off-campus location. I mean, obviously, $105 million is a really big number, and if there's a way to share space with them that would offset our costs, and obviously that site, if it were to be repurposed in a public-private partnership way, might bring revenue and offset some of the costs. I understand that, but I'd just be curious to know what the status is around the possibility of partnering with the county about a facilities for, well, partly what we're using that site for now.
I definitely think that needs to be the focus on that facility. Again, the Oakley multi-purpose facility is another one. Is we should really try to identify funding partnerships with all of the stakeholders in the future. And that does add to
You're talking about Oakley because it has a library component.
It does have a library,
Right,
absolutely,
another
yeah.
opportunity to have a partnership.
Yeah, and there's just then funding coordination and making sure that our CIPs align. And definitely work that we need to do with the county, but those are definitely opportunities for that. There's a lot of efficiencies in, for example, fuel station maintenance facilities, that sort of thing. And so we can definitely take advantage of that, that common structure supporting multiple operations.
And I think we've talked about this before. If one day we were to have a 1/4-cent sales tax for transit, that it could be spent on a transit maintenance center, I believe was what we, yes, you're nodding back there, Jessica. Yes, because it would be enhancements to the service provision.
Right, and I think that's where we need to, I just want to name that the transit feasibility study has local support, but also we're looking at working with the county on what the future of not just our transit facility looks like, but growth in the county and in the region. So I'm curious about not just our transit maintenance facility, but also our transportation hub. If we're thinking about connecting with rail one day or expanding to the downtown circulator program, what it looks like to have bus facilities like Greyhound, which can't currently fit in our bays. If we're looking that big, do we have more funding opportunities, or federal grant funding, state grant funding, that we could coordinate with the MPO and the county? But I think that starts with the transit feasibility study.
Agreed, and those are exactly what the incremental pieces of planning and then site development and those, and that's how we need to focus on building the budgets out in the future, for sure.
Yeah, and I think we have an outstanding question about the feasibility study and the cost. It looks like it's not going to hit until this next fiscal year, but whether there's an opportunity to cost share that with the county as we look at that big
And yes,
picture there.
I've had conversations with the county manager, and we are going to make that recommendation.
Okay. Anyway, this was just you giving us a sampling, and we are
This is just
kind
sample.
of picked through it, but yeah,
There's a
lot
few more
to-
examples out there.
Yeah.
And again, this is facility specific. I'm sure if you ask Greg his big picture needs, he'd be able to tell you there's a list out there for those as well. So it really is a challenge, not only for us to do the outreach and to understand how we can partner, But it's also a challenge internally for us to understand how to deliver the prioritization of these projects to council for the annual budget.
And Jade, I hope that we don't understate the information that we will get as a result of our comprehensive facility study. I know you started out with that, but I want to remind council that this is underway, and this will truly reveal particularly our buildings and the condition of a lot of our assets.
That's correct.
And we don't think that that ticket item is going to be very low.
And to that point is the Oakley multipurpose facility was actually added to this list. I think this list has actually been in a previous presentation as well. That facility was added as a preliminary review of our facility, what the information we're getting about the comprehensive facility study. So we're already being informed a little bit, but certainly there's a lot to be pulled out of that.
And this comprehensive facility study, what's the timing for us to see the major findings?
It'll be summer of next year,
Okay.
and then it will inform the
several budget
2025 budget cycle.
Great, thanks.
Okay, now to kind of dive deeper into the specific projects. As I had mentioned, but there's support staff, hopefully behind me, to help with the
They all
questions
fled
of
the
these
room.
projects.
That's how we feel too.
If
And
questions,
just to be certain, Jade, this is unfunded.
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So we're actually go through unfunded, partially funded, and funded projects. I do want to highlight that there is a future of these projects, a near future for council to hear more information and for us to follow up and to request awards. So these are being highlighted. This is not an exhaustive list of our projects, as you know, but these are the ones that have some major decisions to be made in the next 6 months. And things that will be coming back to council for additional conversation and decisions on. So just to kind of highlight the needs for McCormick Field, this is a renovation and upgrade initiated by the Major League Baseball standards. They have several years ago increased the expectations for their minor league affiliates to improve their facilities, and they provided a scoring system. And McCormick Field didn't score very well. And some of the general categories of improvement that were necessary were player and support staff facilities. That includes, not comprehensively or exhaustively, but parking, locker rooms, other facilities, type of support facilities. The $37.5 million that is listed here also includes the customer experience, the user experience, the folks that are coming to ball games and watching. And then also in that, you are addressing some facility needs that have been accumulating over time. So I think last time in some of the media coverage of this, but it had suggested this was a $30 million facility, and at the time it was. It was a real number. But recently there was a second review of the scope of that project of these needs, and that number increased from 37 to $37.5 million. Those are not unusual numbers for us to see, given give it 6 months or a year, you do see substantial increases in the cost of projects. This is, as we had talked about in the previous slide, a partnership opportunity for us to have partnership in the funding of this project. The Tourism Development Authority would be a funding partner, the county, and the team. So there's been a couple of scenarios put together regarding the way that this would be funded, and all of those partners are at the table. Although there are partnerships there, this is still a substantial financial contribution for the city. Over a 20-year debt financing period, the city's contribution is estimated to be about $1 to $1.2 million per year. And then again, the standards set by MLB, they're on a schedule, and that schedule does require that there be a commitment to the funding strategy by April 1st, 2023. Again, These projects are being highlighted because these will be things that come back to council in future work sessions or on future agendas, and so wanted to highlight this as something that you will be hearing about again.
If I may, I'm excited to tour the facility later this week. In our check-ins for the past few months, a top priority for me has been ensuring that the private-public partnerships have more public benefits and public access. For example, could the facility and its parking lot support regional and independent baseball uses, neighborhood resiliency, community events, and food accessibility and addressing food deserts? I think that having more public use of the space more closely connects the public with this space instead of it just being a public park that we rent out for private for-profit use, which we all benefit from having a family-friendly event that can be relatively affordable and spending time together as a community. But I wonder if we also could see more of an acknowledgement of the rich history of the facility, including the championship-winning team of the 1940s, the Asheville Blues.
In the presentations, I do believe that they opened it up for more community use, but we'll certainly be responsive to that. So a funded project is Walton Street Park. I will talk a little bit about what funding means in this case. Is that Parks Department has taken 1 year of their annual capital allocation of $500,000 and dedicated it to improvements to the park through an engagement process which they had conducted with the community. They discussed how that $500,000 would be best spent and the prioritization of those improvements. The list that came out of that engagement effort was improving courts, the sports courts, the playground, the paved walks, signs and murals to honor the history of the pool. They will continue to engage. I'll take a moment to explain that the $500,000 is initial funding for this, and the future engagement will inform future improvements to the park. They are planning a multi-generational outreach effort, which will touch on the history of the park, programming specifically for youth and so on and so forth. And so, like I said, where council will see this in the next 6 months is using those things that are identified in this scope as a design scope for an award that will be coming to council in March or April. There will be activity on the site as early as January or February, and that will be parks going out to do some initial work and prepare the site for development. All of that said, we have a model for delivering in park improvements in this manner, where it's we can certainly budget for the total park improvement, or we can pursue things more incrementally. The example I like to use is Shiloh. That park has had a major renovation over the last several years, and it didn't have a park improvement budget. It had a bunch of different park improvement, smaller budgets, and in that case, it's been improved walking access, trails. It's had a playground improvement, sports courts, parking lots, ball fields, and all of it. And then the rec centers had several $1 million put into it as well. So I think we have a model for delivering this way, but I also think that in the future you'll see additional CIP requests for improvements to the park. Wanted to be specific about the pool that's under construction at the Grant Center. And this has been brought to council in previous presentations. It does replace the Walton Street pool. But again, those efforts that are being conducted in the community and the engagement will help to identify a way to repurpose the pool site and the building and honor the historic nature of that facility. I lost my screen. So in the partially funded category is municipal building. This building has been kind of under study for the last several years. We've done some investigation associated with the area, the bays in which the fire trucks are parked. And we've identified that there was a structural repair done in the 90s, and it needs to be renovated. So we've done a little bit of additional work on that facility, and it's under observation. The reason we're under observation, make sure that we can keep it in the not a concern category, but we do need to actually invest money in trying to, in improving this building and reconstructing the building. So once we started to peel back the layers, right, we got structural needs. We identified a roof has some leaks. They're not actually penetrating through to the office space, but you can see this, under the membrane of the roof, there's some moisture. The building envelope, this is a 1925 building. All brick buildings have to be maintained on the outside, tuck pointing. You etch out the grout and then you replace it. Its HVAC system is close to the end of its useful life, which includes the boiler. And then there's opportunity for office space improvements. So all of that is a big project. And again, to kind of go back to the incremental piece of how we can deliver projects. We have put together, we've assembled nearly 3 years of facility maintenance budget. In the presentation, or the part of the presentation that Taylor demonstrated, we get about $700,000 per year, $800,000 per year for facility maintenance. We have, at this time, accumulated about 3 years worth of funding, and through the preliminary design efforts of this facility, we find that we have about a $4 million project, and if that just includes the slab reconstruction and the roof. And so we are at about $1.5 million short of our funding need. On the higher end, to include all of those things, we're about $4.8 million short. So what we'll be bringing back to council over the next 6 months is a request for additional funding for 2024 budget year to authorize in July. That's when our third year of facility maintenance money comes available. We'll be wanting to bid this around the July timeframe of 2023. But we will need additional funds to support this project. We can phase this project. It is going to be disrupted to fire operations and have an impact on service delivery. That's a smaller impact if we actually do the reconstruction. If there were to be some changing circumstance, it could certainly be a longer if we didn't have fire operations out there. So we're strongly recommending that additional funding be put towards this project and allow us to get this taken care of. And last on my list is the Duke substation downtown. But this is kind of in the unknown category in that we've been recently approached by, recently is relative, I guess, in that they need to reconstruct the downtown substation. I know that there's been a lot of public conversation about the appropriate location, and in identifying that location, then that project needs to, like all projects, needs to be scoped. And they've, in studying that site, they are looking at potential utility conflicts and the financing of those, resolving those conflicts, and also the responsibility of how to resolve those conflicts. That has impacts to budget. At this point in time, like I said, they're just exploring what those impacts might be, so I haven't identified the budgets entirely. And then also the scheduling, that's going to be a component of being able to identify what those needs are and programming those. So this is a project under development, and as we get information, it will come back to council in its various forms. And like I said, over the next 6 months, we'll be providing updates, and one of those will be the schedule.
Before we move on from this slide, I just wanted to go ahead and be on the record noting that I do have concerns about grid security in North Carolina, and I hear the governor talking about us needing to shore up security for our grid. So if we have an opportunity to invest in long-term strategies, whether it's battery-powered or gas-insulated substations that have built-in elements of security of our grid, I know that's something I've reached out to staff about in the mayor's office. So I just wanted to name that should be part of it, not just the cheapest way of doing it, but the best way of doing it for resiliency. We have the hospital system for the region, so I think that's another important factor in maintaining energy security.
And I talked to our Duke representative for our area today, and we're going to get with each other to talk about it. I mean, obviously, Duke is operating in many, many states, and this is a systems-wide issue for them. So I wanted to have a discussion with them about what their response is going to be. They haven't officially said yet, but obviously, this is of concern, and the governor's put it on their radar as well. So in thinking about constructing new substations, I think you're right that the security issues are ramped up. I mean, they were already noted. Obviously, we're watching a war happen in Europe, and the target is an electrical system, and that's always a vulnerability of any city, state, country. So we will have to work with our partners to figure out what their response is going to be to this in terms of what we see in our community.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to present today. If you have any questions or further discussion, we're happy to try to answer those and follow up with information for you.
Jade, could you go, I'm sorry, could you go back to slide 19? It's kind of the A, B, C, D, E slide. Yep. So I understand clearly why affordable housing still has 6.5. I know a good bit about Parks and Rec. Can you elaborate or show me a slide or point to a document that explains to me where the 18.4 under transportation?
Absolutely. What I can do is I'll provide you with a list of those projects. Those are the sidewalk projects for
Sidewalks.
the most part. And
Okay.
we can provide you with a list of those and hopefully account for all that $18.4 million and give you a list of when those will bid.
You know, when I deal with a lot of the HUD and the federal money coming to us, like our COC, if we don't spend it, we lose it. Does that scenario ever happen in our own private matters?
It certainly can for grants. We've not actually encountered that in my time here. And with the GO bonds, it's my understanding we could ask for extensions. We're going to try everything we can to not put ourselves in that situation. So again, staff is focused on spending that down, and we can provide a detailed explanation of what that looks like. We
Excuse
did
me,
just
Jay,
yes,
does
ma'am.
greenways, do they fit in transportation or Parks and
Yeah,
Recreation?
there's so just kind of at a high level, you've got the couple million, $2.5 million for Swananoa River Greenways in here, and that's at 65% design. We're working towards getting that ready to bid. The various sidewalk projects, Haywood Street and Johnston Boulevard are in right-of-way acquisition right now. One of the kind of the backstory of some of those projects, Haywood Street and Johnston Boulevard, Onteora, they all required additional funding in order for us to build what the expectations were. So we went to the MPO. The MPO then had, so that's state funding, passed through for federal funding through the state. The state had a moratorium for about 6 or 8 months on issuance of funds, and so that was a little bit of a delay for us. But using state funds and federal funds, now we have to abide by their right-of-way acquisition standards, and which is just a little bit more detailed than what we would have to abide by here, just with a local. So, like I said, there's a lot of reasons for where we're at, but we certainly have a plan to address that. So we will provide that information.
Okay. And then one more question. So enterprise funds, are accountable for all their own expenses, but that's not the same with capital. So when I see like parking deck needs repairs, the enterprise fund that is parking is only for its operational expenses, and the capital has to come from somewhere else?
No. For example, water, this guys behind me probably just explain this better, but my experience with water is that water has its own capital. It's an enterprise fund, it has its own capital and its operating budget. Harrah's, I believe, has a capital fund. There are opportunities, aside from water, I think there are opportunities to supplement those capital funds as well. Am I right in that?
So I'm just wondering, because I saw like parking deck
Yeah.
repairs and stuff, but that's not coming out of a parking enterprise or capital fund. That's a separate request?
So there is a separate capital budget. I do believe the general fund can supplement those budgets as well. Is that correct?
That's Tony.
I'm happy to turn it back over to Jay if you all have any more questions for him. But so I guess to answer that question, so we have 3 enterprise funds that are self-sufficient: water, parking, and stormwater. So up until this point, at least, all of the capital projects within those funds are going to be funded by dollars generated in those funds. So the general fund would not fund a parking deck. or any of the water improvements or anything like that. Now, in the transit fund and the Harris Fund, those do rely on general fund dollars to support any capital projects in those funds. Often in transit, we do end up getting grants as well to help with that, but the general fund is usually the primary funder of both transit and Harris capital projects.
So when I see the parking garage maintenance and so on in the millions, that's already planned and coming from their own capital?
You're looking
Yes.
at the.
That's
Oh,
in
you're
the
looking
memo.
at the
Okay.
memo.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
just making
coming
sure I
from the
understand.
parking fund, yes.
Okay. And then one last question, which is more of a philosophical thing. I'll use the Pinto and the new tires as an example. You know, we don't know what's happening with the economy. There's a lot of unknowns. Many of us were just at a Metro Outlook. But if residents are, say, not replacing their own car and getting new tires instead because they're unsure about the economy, do we ever operate that way? I mean, are we just like, prices are up, interest rates are up, and materials are up, and we're just going to plow forward? We never stall for things to settle down or anything?
So I think that's actually probably a pretty good lead-in to the last
Okay.
part of our discussion today,
Great.
which is all about our capacity and kind of where we're at with dollars. I guess the short answer to that is no. Obviously, we're limited by a number of things in terms of our available resources, our ability to issue debt up to a certain capacity level there. And so, no, we obviously don't ever go into our capital planning assuming that we're going to spend beyond our means or whatever we can generate from our own resources. So. All right. Any other questions for Jade, or y'all want me to launch on into the final section here?
Or
All
Renee.
right, I'm going to go. So Tony McDowell, Finance Director, and right on cue with budget season every year. I got a cold about 2 weeks ago, so I'm still dealing with the fallout of that. So if I have to hit the water bottle frequently, you all know that. Taylor made it through his today, which, he and I seem to suffer from that during budget season. Anyway, so the last part here is we're going to talk about the debt model that we used, the financial capacity, and kind of this look forward with the CIP program. And in some ways, Taylor kind of already hit on really what I think is going to be the key takeaway from this section, which is really we have limited capacity with our existing resources over the next 5 to 6 years with our CIP. So, but just to kind of walk through this, so this slide is one that we've shown you all before. I think we showed it to you all during the budget process last year. But this kind of lays out the process for how we fund our capital projects from adoption of the budget right through to us issuing the debt and incorporating those payments into our operating budget. And as Taylor mentioned, most of our capital projects, including most of those that you all have in the memo that we sent you all, are primarily funded through debt. We do obviously have some grants and other sources as well, but it's primarily debt that we issue, either general obligation bonds primarily or limited obligation bonds. And how that all works is, you all will adopt the budget in June, and that'll include a list of new capital projects. Those projects will start soon after, usually, not going straight to construction, but going through some kind of design phase, right-of-way acquisition, et cetera, before construction starts. But what we do from the very beginning is we issue short-term bank loans to help with the cash flow in those projects before we take out the long-term debt. And this has been a model that we've been following for the last 10 years or so. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to have cash on hand as we're spending money on these projects, but it also avoids us issuing the long-term debt early and beginning to have to pay both the principal and interest on that debt over an extended period of time. With these short-term bank loans, we only pay interest on the money we use. So in many ways, it's like a home equity line of credit or something like that. So as you draw down the money, you're only paying back the interest portion of what you use. And usually after a certain period of time, usually 2 to 3 years, when we've spent a significant amount of money, usually somewhere in the $25 to $30 million range, we'll actually come back to you all, and we're doing this tonight actually at your formal meeting, where we'll come back and request authorization to go ahead and issue the long-term debt for these projects. And that long-term debt is typically extended out over 20 years. The OGC, the type of debt schedule they like to see is a 20-year debt schedule with level principal over that 20-year period. And then we incorporate those debt payments into upcoming budgets. And we do all this utilizing a multi-year financial model. And for those of you who are on the Finance Committee, I think it was the September meeting where we had Andrew Carter from DEC and Associates, who are our financial advisors and who've been helping us develop and maintain this model over the last 10 years. He came and did a presentation on the types of debt, and really went into a lot of detail about our capital funding modeling. But what we do is we have a multi-year model that looks at both revenues and expenses within our capital program. And even though we adopt a 5-year CIP, and Taylor showed you that 5-year CIP earlier, this model that we use for modeling our capacity extends out to 20 to 25 years. So we're really looking really far into the future and what our capacity is. And right now, in the current fiscal year, we put about $15.5 million every year into that program, or into the CIP model. And here's some of the assumptions that we have for that model. We do grow that $15.5 million every year. We grow it by about 2%, and how we arrived at that 2% number was that's roughly equal to what we see on average in terms of our property tax base growth every year. And so that's the amount of revenue growth that we put into the program every year. We look at the timing of project spending, so we're constantly updating our cash flow estimates on projects. We're also evaluating our interest rate assumptions. As you all know, interest rates have gone up, some in the last 6 to 12 months, and so that, of course, limits our ability to fund new projects because it takes up some of the capacity. We look at the minimum fund balance levels, so this CIP model has its own fund balance that's separate from the general fund. And so we look at how the levels of that fund balance are going to be over that 20 to 25 year horizon. And then obviously inflationary pressures impact the modeling and how much we have available. I think a great example is when Jay was talking about the McCormick Field project and how the costs for that have grown. We've seen that with a lot of our projects over the last few years. So kind of where does that leave us in terms of our capacity moving forward over the next 5 to 7 years? So as Taylor mentioned, all of the active projects that you all have in the memo, as well as the projects that are shown in the 5-year CIP are fully funded within this model. And where that puts us, and again, this is all what we would call limited obligation bond spending, is that we're going to be looking at spending approximately $81 million over the next 5 years or so. And you can kind of see the breakdown amongst those various categories. I think these numbers are probably a little different, just to confuse you all a little more, a little different than maybe what Taylor showed earlier, but these are really the cash flows that we expect to see go out the door over the next 5 years. I don't know why we got so precise on the capital maintenance budget to take it out 3 decimals, but we did. Maybe that's because we like Jade a lot. Our capacity has shrunk some since we last did an updated model. And that really relates to the fact that, again, I mentioned the inflationary pressures. We're seeing higher bid prices for some of our projects, and we also have a rising interest rate environment. And so what that means, when we worked with DEC and Associates to update the model a few months ago, they came back and said, essentially, again, everything that you all have planned or active is funded, but you really don't have any capacity to add any new spending over the next 5 years or so. So what that means, if we're going to do new projects, we're either going to have to slow down spending on some of our current projects, delay those projects or something like that to the next 5-year window, or add additional resources to the CIP program moving forward. So speaking of moving forward, so Taylor talked some about the process for CIP development, and we're really using this FY24 process to identify where we have gaps, where we can't fund projects within our existing resources, kind of looking forward to a potential 2024 GO bond to help with those funding needs. Like I said, we're identifying what's flexible in the current plan. If there are projects that can be moved out or spending that can be slowed down, we're looking at that. And as always, we're looking for outside funding opportunities. And what we're trying to do with that is we're really trying to be strategic with that and utilize funding sources such as the TDA and the MPO to fund projects that are either already part of our CIP or they're identified as high priority projects for us internally. And then kind of next steps. So where do we go from here? And so as Taylor mentioned at the start, and I think maybe Ms. Campbell as well, this is kind of the start of the budget process. Starting a little earlier maybe this year and starting with capital as opposed to operating like we normally do. But internally, staff's already working to identify what are some of those high priority projects. Jade identified some of the needs and some of the things that are going to require decisions in the next 6 months or so from council. And we're going to continue to update you all and update the information for the existing projects as well as looking at new projects. And this is in some ways working to help us develop a potential 2024 GO bond referendum. memorandum. And if we go ahead with the GEO bond in 2024, we want to make sure we build in enough time for us as staff to prepare project lists, prepare good sets of estimates for projects that may be part of that GEO bond package in 2024. And like I said, we're really at the beginning of the journey with you all in the budget this year. We'll be back with a lot more work sessions after this, and we will continue to follow up on capital as we go through the budget. All right, so back to the key takeaways that Taylor mentioned at the beginning. And again, our goal is to have a capital plan that considers our long-term needs. As Taylor mentioned, and as I've been talking about, our current capacity to fund projects outside of the current plan really is limited. And as you all got from Jade in his presentation, we've got some significant decisions that are on the horizon and that are going to involve additional funding needs. So I think with that, that might be my last slide. So that's the last slide for the presentation. So I'm the last man standing here, but and so I guess I'll be happy to take any questions, but I'd also be happy to defer questions to Jade or Taylor or anyone else in the room as well.
I'm just curious if we ever look more than 5 years out.
If we look more than 5 years out with our planning, like I said, in terms of the projects, no. We've been working toward trying to develop a 10-year look forward, but right now we're still at that 5. But the modeling we do in terms of looking at cash flows and looking at future debt requirements, that goes out 20 to 25 years.
Okay. I'm glad someone's looking.
I'd like to ask you a question. When you plan these budgets, whatever, what is the percentage that we actually meet the goals that we actually set out to? Or what is the percentage that we fall short of the estimated budget and the projects itself?
So I think I understand your question. So I think,
Let me try to explain it. Okay, when we adopt these budgets, right, what I'm trying to figure out, what would you say would be the percentage of times that we pretty much, fall dead on the nail or either run short or have excess?
Is that financially, are you saying?
I'm talking with our budget that we planned, like he's
Right,
doing the plan.
in terms of the cost.
In terms of the cost, where do we fall? Do we ever fall?
I think it's a mix, really. I think, we often, especially on and I'm going to focus really on capital budgeting, not operating here. But on the capital side, it is in some ways more difficult to predict budgets for capital projects
Yeah,
because, again, you're talking about a multi-year horizon.
Yeah.
And things happen, like COVID and inflation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we do have to come back and add additional dollars to projects just because prices go up. And I think, Jade showed the slide for the GEO bond projects and how we've turned the $74 million project into set of projects into $91 million. And some of that is from additional funding sources from grants and stuff like that. But some of it was because projects grew in cost and we had to shift some money from our regular CIP over to the bond program to be able to afford to complete those projects. So I would say most of the time I think things come in under budget, but I would say there's also times, particularly in the capital budget, more than the operating, where we do have to come back and add additional resources to projects.
Well, you also asked about, Chris, when you were saying that you could actually shift money from the different bond programs to, if needed.
Yes,
If
yeah,
needed.
we
So you
can.
can do that? Okay.
Yeah, when you all adopt the budget every year, you adopt it at what we call the fund level. So what that allows us to do is if we have a capital project that is short in one area, we can shift money around to cover that, so.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Is that what's getting into the CIP fund balance? These overage shortage, we're kind of close but not far.
Yeah, potentially. We do like to avoid, every year when you all adopt the budget, we do adopt contingency as a part of the CIP, and that's $750,000. And so that's typically the first place we go. So if a project is coming in over budget, we will look to that adopted contingency, which is part of the budget, part of the cash flow already, before we would look to go into fund balance to cover that.
And then the fund balances for various enterprise and funds are different percentages. If I recall, like 8% maintain a healthy credit ratio, 15 for general fund. Is that the same for CIP, or is that just our internal planning?
So it's a little different for the CIP. And I'm going to draw a blank on exactly what our percentage is for that, but it's a little different. I think we maintain a little bit higher level in the CIP program just because it's kind of
High risk.
It's a self-contained
Yeah.
thing. It's not like the general fund or the
It's
water
not
fund.
a governed thing. We have to maintain a certain
Yeah.
percent, right?
Yeah.
And it's high risk. Okay.
No, and it's not governed by
Yeah.
any policies or anything like that. No.
Thank you.
I have two things to share that I'm hearing, but then also two questions. So first I wanted to say thank you because I heard equity and sustainability at the front of this conversation. We talked about that last year and I heard it. today. And so thank you for setting that intention and that tone at the front. Because of our state of climate emergency, that's really important. So regarding equity, 2 examples for consideration. It looks like this is a move towards future bond funding. I'm hearing the conversation that happened at this month's Community Reparations Commission meeting around neighborhood plans and already identified needs. So I anticipate we should be prepared to respond to future recommendations. But also we have a climate justice initiative project going on. And I'm hearing very loud and clear from the community that trust building looks like that public input in legacy neighborhoods and among BIPOC members of the community and most impacted frontline community to be matched with real dollars and an intention for a meaningful response. Shoring up disparities to mitigate the worst of climate change, including stormwater and food security, while partnering facilities for education and economic development. The second thing is, I heard some about our carbon reduction goals, but I was also thinking about how that fits with our procurement policy. We've had questions about this a lot over the past year, and I wonder what that looks like to be in alignment around our complete streets policy, roof replacement, so that we make sure that we have feasibility for solar already layered in, low and no emission vehicles, making sure that staff has support to reconsider purchasing as new technology comes online, so we can make the investment. And I just think about the example that like we have a procurement contract around transit vehicles, but we hear that they might not work on all of our routes. So if there's a change in the options, that we can change the contract. I want to make sure that we do our job to support staff, making sure our carbon reduction goals are met with our own policy. We're not getting in our own way. So my question on that is, can we get a list of our procurement policies across departments to see if updates are needed and make sure that we're doing that support work? Because I know we say, of course we're going to put on a roof if it's feasible to put solar on there, but making sure that our procurement would be something we could do to support. And then the second question I had is, I know our legislative agenda is in final draft mode. Thank you, Brad. Hearing from the other municipal electeds across North Carolina, it looks like we're likely going to need to coordinate and ask for future infrastructure bill funding or revenue funding for housing.
Yes.
We're spending a lot of these infrastructure dollars right now because we're so far behind in infrastructure dollars for roads and bridges, but a lot of that is getting invested because people are being pushed away further from resources. So that gets us like in response mode instead of like getting to the root cause of the reason that people can't afford housing close to resources. So since we're looking at 5 to 10 years out on capital, can we look 5 years out on legislative agendas?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we do coordinate frequently with other municipalities as well as the League of Municipalities to try to sync up and create a bigger, more broad coalition to make these asks. So thank you for that.
And I'm going to the Metro Mayor's Conference this week. Talk to other mayors and see. We've been talking about this issue for a while now, but how it translates in terms of the legislature's willingness to do something substantive around it is a challenge. But it continues to be something we'll push for. So we'll see what the viability is this session. Hopefully there's some
Yeah, I was
opportunity
just
there.
hearing from smaller municipalities that like if they raise their property tax by, 1 cent, they could buy 1 house. So there's probably an
Right.
opportunity for larger cities to coordinate efforts with smaller municipalities. Maybe we get a federal action if we can't get a state action.
In keeping with the legislative agenda topic, real quick, I shared this in my check-in, but thought I'd share it with everyone. I understand the county is putting forth 4 legislative items and 4 budget request items, and I thought that was fascinating and something we might want to consider ourselves.
Do you know what those are? This
I-
isn't a quiz. I'm just curious because
Pop quiz.
so much state funding passes through the county, but doesn't pass through cities. So I'm just wondering if it's apples to apples or apples to oranges.
I don't know. I know something around teachers.
We can get a
but
copy
yeah.
of their,
Just an
something
interesting-
around teachers, right? I mean,
Yeah, which
again, I
would
mean,
be-
education flows through the county and not.
But then this whole Memorial Stadium and Sports Commission state funding, that came up. So I just wonder if it's something we should consider or look into, see what others are doing.
So when we did the last general obligation bond in 2016, which was the first one passed since like the 1980s, right? You're nodding. So it's not, and Asheville's has a funny history with general obligation bonds, which isn't a very consistent one, unlike a lot of cities that do consistently have general obligation bonds on their ballots every few years. We have not developed that pattern, but obviously it is the most significant way to scale up, if you will, our capital program. And that's why cities use it, because it's so significant. I mean, we were just inching along, and with this bond package passed in 2016 of $74 million, we've been able to redo rec centers. We have significant sidewalk projects that are about to happen right now, road resurfacing projects. So my hope is that, and I will also say, I believe last time, the time period from when we decided we were gonna do a GO bond to when it was actually on the ballot was like 4 months. I mean, it was quick, maybe 6, I don't remember, but it was a short window. So we have more time. We have to do a GO
Very
bond in
short
an
window.
even year election. I think that is the
That's
rule
correct.
now in North Carolina. So the next opportunity for us would be 2024. So what I'm hearing you all say is there's not capacity, financially speaking, to add to what we've really got in the pipeline, which is a big pipeline. We've got a lot of stuff there. So I'm hopeful that we can put together a bond package for consideration in 2024 for voters to consider. Getting voter buy-in is a good way for us to help understand whether or not voter support and resident support putting dollars behind these improvements, because that's really what it is. Sometimes you have to raise taxes, sometimes you don't. It depends on how much growth we see, natural revenue growth we see or not. And I also think it's important for us to kind of stagger with the county. The county just put theirs on. Obviously, ours is only citywide, but I think that's a lot for folks to consider if you've got 2 different entities running bond referendum in the same election cycle. So I know we've talked about the need for a public safety bond, for example, so that we can do a lot of the work for our fire stations and other public safety facilities, but there's obviously a lot of other needs that are out there. So I think that's kind of I feel like that's where this conversation is going. So I'm hopeful we'll be able to think about that. In terms of this next fiscal year, we haven't gotten down into the nitty gritty and what our forecasting is, but I think you're already telling us don't expect a lot of room for additional capital.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Mayor, you set that up perfectly in terms of the need for additional revenue, but and obviously you won't let us, we're committing to handling debt responsibly. We're not going to ask you to extend this community in terms of what we can afford to pay for. And so that's why we're having these workshops. We want to bring you as much information so that you all can make informed decisions about not only the investments that you want to make in terms of just the physical and capital stuff, but also management of the debt. And so it is almost impossible to meet the needs of our community with pay-as-you-go, because we just don't have that tax base. So getting into and I guess borrowing, as long as we can pay the debt service, we think is a responsible way to manage capital investments. And many other communities across the country do it this way, as well as my former community having a regular cycle. Right. And it was off year of Mecklenburg County. So it was, we never did it at the same time. And I think that is a very responsible way for us to try to address the numerous capital needs that we have in this community.
I know, I'll say, I'm excited to hear that we're thinking about a regular cycle, having spent a lot of time looking at how other cities really meet the ambitions of our vision. We need to be looking at that, and just, we do this in our homes. You know, when I was done paying daycare and Ruby went to public school, thank you, public school, we were able to start looking at long-needed maintenance to our home. And then we started using that little section of our home budget for that. And I think us looking at that, that'll allow us to get to 10-year capital ideas and to, again, just meet the moment of what our community's asking us for, to have outstanding core city services and really lean into the climate emergency. So I want to get into all the detail of what it would really mean to be having ongoing cycles like this, and just really excited about staff's wisdom and leadership to be bringing the conversation to us.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think that education piece is going to be key to the residents, because we don't have this history of bonds, of going after bonds like this. And then maybe that full understanding of why a complete cycle is necessary is also absent in the community. Examples from other cities are always helpful, and this is certainly how other cities do it. We're just behind.
Thank you.
Well, no, we're now in the game, though.
We're in
I
the
would-
game.
I
We
would
were just
offer-
starting behind.
Yeah, we just need to make it, you know, to continue it. You know, the advantage of getting this onboarded over multiple years is that you're then retiring debt when you're bringing on new. So some cities are even able to float a bond referendum and say, this will not raise taxes. And they're able to do that because they're retiring debt when they're
Right.
bringing on new. So we're, you know, we're not at that stage, except that we are fortunate to be a growing city, and what that means is we have a growing revenue base. So what that actual property tax implication might mean could be lessened because of that natural growth. So we just have to wait and see.
I do think it would be helpful, though, to look at fleshing out what a complete cycle would look like, what it would mean in 20 years for this city, to help explain exactly what
Sure,
the mayor just
yeah.
said. I
Just
think
wait, when we do this, you'll get to do the road show that we did last time.
I was involved, yeah.
To talk about
Yeah.
all of that, what that means.
But you
I had
can't
road show, I
advocate
mean, all
for
around the
passage.
community.
I said, but you can't advocate for passage. I'm being a lawyer.
You can just explain.
You can just.
Just like Brownie came and did it
That's right.
for us recently. So,
But thank you, Mayor, for you all's time. We greatly appreciate your attention. Great questions. We will do follow-up. We will be starting our budget process in terms of the entire process. If we could just close out on that, and then we'll, whoever, anybody from finance and budget.
So I'm looking at Taylor and he's looking at me. I'm not sure we know the exact date when we will be back before you all. I think it's sometime in February, but we will, pick up with the new policy, finance and HR committee in January and February, and have those meetings. And we'll certainly be bringing budget topics to you all at those committee meetings as well. So.
all right, thanks.
Thank you, finance staff.
Yep.
All right, let's wait until Dan tells us we're off the air.
All right.